We're still talking about the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. As we are watching right now, we can see that still the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump are going to be moving to the Capitol from the White House. This is how it's done on a normal day. It's 10:37 a.m. right now in Washington, D.C., and these gentlemen are headed to the Trump inauguration. I'm still being joined by John Gunnison, who's a geopolitics expert. He's joining us from the United States. He is obviously American. And Kalu is a Nigerian. He's an economist, but he lives in the United States. And he's also joining us to talk about this inauguration. And, of course, what this means for the United States, what this means for Europe, what this means for Africa, what this means for the rest of the world, because all eyes are on the United States. Now, before we went on that break, we were talking about economic policies and what have you. John, let me come to you because you've lived in the Middle East. Let's talk about, the ceasefire deal and why it was rushed just before Donald Trump's swearing in. What was the fear, if you ask me? What was the fear, rather? Why were they rushing to have this peace deal before Trump came in? And what's Donald Trump's ideology about what's happening in the Middle East? I'm talking about Israel and Hamas. And now that he's going to be sworn in as president, how do you think he's going to handle the situation?
Thanks, Maryann. So when Donald Trump was president the first time around, he operated almost as a zealot in defense of Israel and to promote Israel's interest. He gave a U.S. stamp of approval to the annexation of two occupied territories by Israel, the first being East Jerusalem and the second being the Golan Heights. East Jerusalem is a territory that's disputed between Israel and the Palestinian territories, and it has been signified as a potential future capital of the Palestinian territories when they become sovereign and independent, hopefully, in the future. And the Golan Heights were seized by Israel during the 1967 war, and internationally they're recognized as part of Syria. So those two territories, Donald Trump gave the thumbs up and the U.S. stamp of approval to Israel's annexation and recognized them officially as part of Israel's territory. This was, of course, a grave violation of the United Nations Charter. Borders are meant to be infallible in the post-war UN system. Trump also looked the other way at Israeli settlements of the occupied West Bank. That was the source of one of the first disputes between the incoming Trump administration, the outgoing Obama administration in 2016 when Trump was coming into office. And disputes over that and how the United Nations and other countries voted at the UN over a resolution to condemn the settlement led to the prosecution of Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn. Donald Trump's Middle East advisor was his son-in-law, who has investments in occupied territories. He's financially involved in the settlements. And they oriented all of U.S. policy around trying to help Israel annex those territories. They organized deals with the United Arab Emirates, the country that I used to live, to give promotion of Israel's interest while cutting the Palestinians out of those deals. That was something that he's continued to celebrate as the greatest achievement of his presidency, even though many analysts would look at what's happened since and determined that it was not as much of a peace deal as the encouragement of further aggression by all the states involved. And Trump has put in place a set of advisors, including Mike Huckabee, who says there's no such thing as a Palestinian and that Israel should aggressively annex the West Bank, and others. So all the signals suggest that Trump is going to again act lockstep with Israeli interests. However, the reporting from the last couple of weeks suggests that Trump's Middle East advisor, this time Steve Witkoff, went to Israel and put more pressure on them than the Biden administration had to end the fighting in Gaza. Personally, I wonder if the Israelis were always sort of planning to wrap up the military phase along this timeline. It's not unusual for countries to plan their actions around the cycle of the U.S. presidency. We saw the same thing as Biden prepared to take office in the dispute between Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. They wrapped up their aggression on Qatar right at the time that Biden was coming into office to try to have a clean slate with the new administration. And they made an agreement at the Al Ula in Saudi Arabia that Jared Kushner, Trump's Middle East advisor at the time, took lots of credit for, even though people might say that the timing is just like this timing, that it was really being done to set up the next presidency with a clean slate. So I'm not surprised that the fighting is wrapping along this timeline, as it often has in the past. But I think that those who care about Palestinian interest, well, they'll be glad to see a pause in the fighting, should, of course, remain vigilant and suspicious at what this administration will do with the Israelis, especially when it comes to issues in the West Bank.
Kalu, what do you think about this? I mean, because for the ceasefire, Netanyahu seems to still be a little bit apprehensive, even though, you know, whether we like it or not, the fighting is in his favor, and it keeps him from facing the probe in his country, because we all know that before this whole thing went south, there were protests in Israel against him. And, you know, questions that needed answers before all of this became a thing. What do you think going forward would happen with this so-called ceasefire deal? Do you see some sort of a change of heart down the road on Netanyahu's part?
I think it's all the strategy still favors a peace deal, long-term peace deal with Saudi Arabia. That's been the goal. Some would argue that this whole Hamas attack was done to prevent the sign of the Abrahamic Accord between Saudi Arabia, Israel, and a host of Arab nations. That kicked it away. Now we have a new beginning. Hamas is not defeated. The hostages have not been released by force. If the hostages come back to Israel, then that opens up the door now to revisit Netanyahu's, his issues before the whole October 7th thing that happened. I don't see him surviving. But then again, I don't see who Israel replaces him with, because there's this the mood in Israel now is we don't want nothing to do with especially Gaza. So in the past, you had the Israeli left wing saying, "Oh, let's do a deal, two-state solution." That conversation seems dead in Israel, because once the hostages come back, the oxygen will be taken away from the anti-Netanyahu camp. In that, the left can no longer say, we have a second opinion, which means we're going to have peace with the Palestinians, two-state solution. I think that is gone from Israeli topics right now. Maybe the West Bank, maybe with the PLO, a long-term deal to say, listen, we're going to give more autonomy, possibly discuss a state down the road. And don't forget, Donald Trump might, in this term, he wants a legacy. He might set up the establishment of a Palestinian state as his own legacy. He has worked with Israel. He might do so with the Palestinians. Get this out of the way for once and for all.
Well, that's something that the whole world would live to see. I mean, if if that's even a possibility to start with. But as we're watching now, we can see both President Biden and former President Trump, who's going to be president in a few minutes, riding together to the Capitol in President Biden's limo. We see the guests are all seated, getting ready for this inauguration. And like John said, Donald Trump is, almost unusual, because, most presidents serve 2 terms or just one. But he's gone and come back, and he's one of maybe two people who have done this before. And of course, so many questions begging for answers. Many people are wondering what's, if there's any, certainty to all of the things that he said. President Trump, former President Trump, talks a good game, but then when it comes down to the doing, we're not very sure of it. But then, fingers crossed, let's see what happens. We hear that former President Obama is going to be there, although his wife had said she's not going to show up for that event. We're also going to see George Bush and his wife as guests there. We're still watching out to see the other people who are going to be there. Let's talk about America's, John, I'm coming back to you finally before I let you go. America's foreign relations with every other country. I think we've seen the Labour leader, who's now the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, pay a visit to the US recently. What's going to be that relationship that the US has? Is it going to be strengthened across the board with different other countries? I'm talking about the war in Ukraine. Is there still going to be that same kind of support that the Biden administration gave to Ukraine against Russia? Relations with China and the rest of the world, and of course, neighboring Canada.
Well, it's a very interesting question, Maryann. I think that many countries are excited about Trump coming back into office because in his first term, it was revealed, how easy it was for other countries to manipulate him and to get what they wanted from him, especially with the financial conflicts of interest that are now open. And it will be very easy for other countries to bribe Trump and to do business deals with him and distort U.S. policy in favor of their agenda as they benefit him personally. That was something that the Middle East countries, the Arab Gulf states, proved very successful with that strategy during the first Trump presidency. And they got much more than they would have gotten from another president under those circumstances. However, for countries like the UK, which you mentioned, that have strict anti-corruption legislation in place, it's harder to do that because you can't bribe a foreign leader. You'd be prosecuting your own country for doing so. And that's part of why countries that are traditional allies of the United States that have laws like that have not had as much success with Donald Trump. It does seem in general as though Europe will be deprioritized. That's something that many in the Republican Party have wanted for a long time. There's been the discussion of pivoting to Asia that Obama really introduced into the lexicon, but Trump and Biden have both also aspired to, but have not really succeeded because of the longstanding U.S. commitments to Europe. However, I think that something that we might see in the next Trump administration is a pivot to a different part of the world that is often under-discussed in U.S. politics and policy, and that's Latin America. We could, instead of seeing a pivot to Asia away from Europe, be seeing a pivot to Latin America. For the first time, really, in memory, the incoming Secretary of State is someone who focuses a lot on Latin America and what he's done prior in his career, and that's Marco Rubio. He has spent a lot of time on the issues of Cuba and Venezuela, U.S. adversaries in the Latin American region. And it's interesting that someone who prioritizes that part of the world will be coming into that office. We really have not seen that. Trump has also threatened to use military force inside of Mexico, starting a war with one of our largest neighbors. He's also threatened to use U.S. military force to seize the Panama Canal, which was previously governed by the United States, and the United States also invaded Panama during George Bush's presidency in the early 1990s. So we could be seeing a lot more sort of pugilism towards that part of the world, and it's interesting to consider what the effects of that might be. It could be quite destabilizing for the United States' own neighborhood. But there is also, as I mentioned, these longstanding U.S. adversaries that U.S. policy has not really succeeded in affecting change in those countries, places like Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba. So it's interesting to consider what a new approach might mean for those countries.
Kalu, let me just bring you in for the last few minutes before we go. I can see Elon Musk there, all smiles, getting ready to support his guy, I guess. But I'm getting information that Obama and Bush may not be attending this ceremony. We see Vice President Kamala and her husband there, but that's it. I'm just going to keep scanning the room to see if Obama and Bush show up, because it looks like Mrs. Obama is not going to be there. But Kalu, quickly, what should the African part of the world be gearing up for with the Trump, coming?
I think the main thing is the view on the dollar. I think Trump and his Treasury Secretary have said they want a strong dollar. A strong dollar is bad for emerging economies in Africa, especially because we have to then pay more to import. And of course, our bonds do badly because there's a stronger dollar. So that's the key thing for Africa to watch out. Number two is crude oil exports. America is the largest crude oil producer in the world. Trump wants to drill, baby drill, and also to export more oil and gas, which means there's going to be more competition in Nigeria and in markets, say in India and the Far East, where we sell the bulk of our oil. So we should be looking for, even if oil prices go down, because Trump wants to sell more oil, it's really going to affect our markets because now we're competing. Same thing with gas. We seem to have locked down gas a bit, But America is also going to export gas to Europe. So Nigeria is Europe is one of our big markets. So in terms of the strong dollar, in terms of the oil and gas markets, also for tariffs, we don't do a lot of trade that are going to be tariffed. But Trump wants to do reciprocity. So if we tariff him, it tariffs us. But we have this cover of AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunities Act, which would help Africa. I think the main thing is that Trump is a businessman. And I think it's important for Africa to look at him that way and say, go to him with a proposal and say, this would make you look good if you do this for us. There's no need to get angry or to call him names. He is the first U.S. president you can go to the proposal and say, if you do this, it makes you look good. But we also get benefits. Just buy it. And he will do it. So you want to take that chance now, because once he goes, he's going to go back. Yeah, I mean, America is the laws are set. Israel will be supported by America, whether it's a Democrat or Republican. Americans want a strong dollar. They want to rule the world. They want free trade that benefits America. That is not going to change with Trump or with anyone. But in this next 4 years, you have a guy that you can go and make a deal. If the Democrats had thought about this and said, okay, we're going to go to Trump with a package that says he's going to approve abortion and we'll give him his wall, he would have signed it. He would have signed it. And they would have got it. But is this fighting, this consistent? We want to make sure he's not. That's where they get into trouble, And so he's got 4 years. Now he's a bit more prepared. Pick your fights carefully with him and oppose him on what you feel he's going against the ethos of what America is. But this renaming Gulf of Guinea, what he's doing is he's throwing red meat out there. You're going to chase that renaming and you're going to ignore the rest. It means nothing. Like you said, your guest said, you can rename what you like. It means nothing. But I hear he's doing the renaming because Biden has banned oil and gas drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. So if you rename it Gulf of America, you can drill oil in the Gulf of America and get that ban. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe.
There's a lot that remains to be seen, but I want to thank you, gentlemen. I know that you all have to go see what's going to happen right now because Biden and Trump are in the Capitol right now, and any moment from now, the inauguration will begin in earnest. John Gunnison is a geopolitics expert. Thank you so much, John. I know you joined us from Boston this morning. Happy Inauguration Day. Kalu, are you joining us also from Boston?
No, I'm just saying John's going to be pretty cool today. So
yeah. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Kalu Aja is an economist. He's Nigerian living in the United States. Thank you so much for a great analysis, and good luck on the inauguration. Happy Inauguration Day to you guys.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Thanks, Mary. Take care now.
Thank you so much. Well, Lagos, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, David's got some information for us. On the 5 o'clock hour, Gbadebo joins us.
More news and information coming up. We'll be back in a moment. Mommy! 99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk. 99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.